Hey guys, tonight we ventured deep beneath the sandblasted silence of ancient Egypt, where something strange might be buried. Beneath the golden dunes and beneath the familiar textbook history, something older, stranger, maybe even extraterrestrial. You'll feel the dry air sting your nose, the soft crunch of your steps against sand and shattered limestone. And you'll wonder, who really built all of this? Some say Egypt's monuments were born from nothing but manpower, sweat, and clever pulleys. But others, well, they glance up at the stars and wonder if the blueprints came from somewhere a little farther away. You'll follow their theories tonight, drifting through chambers, into myths, and across galaxies. You probably won't survive this if you're hoping for simple answers. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know your location and local time down in the comments. I'm curious where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun climbs higher, but your thoughts drift further into shadow. You're standing now in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, in a room that feels colder than it should be. Not because of the air conditioning, but because of what's staring back at you. A golden mask. Huge, serene, haunting. Tutankhamun, the boy king. Probably Egypt's most famous pharaoh, though he barely ruled a decade and did very little historically significant, except die young, leave behind a sealed tomb, and captivate the entire world. His burial was packed with treasure. But fringe researchers aren't obsessed with the gold. They're fixated on his body, and the bodies of other pharaohs, especially from one strange, short-lived dynasty. You lean closer. The skull beneath that glittering mask. Slightly elongated. Subtle but noticeable. Just like the skulls of his father, Akhenaten, and his probable mother, Queen Kia. Long heads. Thin necks. Wide hips. Narrow chins. And oddly large eyes. You're not about to scream alien, just yet, but admit it, you're listening now. This brings us to something that often gets buried, pun intended, in school books, the royal mummy anomalies. Several pharaohs in the 18th dynasty exhibit features that don't match the rest of the population. Not just stylistically in their statues and carvings, biologically. CT scans of Tutankhamun's mummy reveal irregularities in his skull. Some have chalked it up to inbreeding, which was common among royal families trying to maintain a pure bloodline. But what if that purity was something else? A lineage of visitors? Historians still argue whether these features were artistic exaggerations or literal depictions. Traditional scholars lean towards symbolism. They weren't supposed to look human, they were supposed to look divine. But here's where things get weird. The more divine they were made to look, the more alien they appeared. And not alien as in strange. Alien as in elongated heads, almond eyes, tiny mouths. You move past Tut's mask to a darker corner of the exhibit. A statue of Akhenaten. You can't take your eyes off it. This guy ruled like a cosmic hipster. He ditched Egypt's entire pantheon of gods, especially the big wigs like Ammonius Ra, and instituted monotheism, the worship of one being, Aten, the disk of the sun. But Aten wasn't just the sun itself. In the art of the time, it's shown as a radiant circle shining down beams, each beam ending in a tiny hand, reaching toward Akhenaten and his family. It looks less like sunlight, and more like a focused energy source. A spotlight, or maybe a tractor beam. And Akhenaten himself? Not your average pharaoh. His art shows a lanky body, exaggerated facial features, a soft belly. Some say he had Marfan syndrome or another genetic disorder. Others think his appearance was intentionally alien, an attempt to distinguish him as part god, part something else. Here's your quirky tidbit. There's a theory lovingly ignored by academia that Akhenaten wasn't just unusual, he was a hybrid. Half human, half star being. A go-between. The first real divine ruler. Genetically engineered by visitors to test humanity's ability to evolve. He came, he changed everything, and, unsurprisingly, he was overthrown within a generation. His son, Tutankhamun, quietly reversed all of it. The old gods returned. The Aten cult was erased. But the statues remain. And so does the lingering suspicion that someone tried to rewrite reality, and got caught doing it. You walk into a different gallery now, dimly lit, filled with sarcophagi and canopic jars. And something clicks. The Egyptians were obsessed with preserving the body. The soul, yes, but the body was the priority. Why? Why not burn it like so many other cultures? Because the body, according to their belief, was needed for the return. The afterlife wasn't a cloud-based vacation. It was a literal journey through the stars, aboard Ra's solar bark. Your body was the vessel, preserved, wrapped tight, like cargo, like stasis. You feel a chill as you pass a walled display of funerary amulets. Many are shaped like scarabs or ankhs. But one looks oddly like a flight badge. A winged disc with outstretched feathers and two coiling snakes, resembling propulsion jets if you're generous, or just artistic license if you're not. You take another look at the mummy sketches, those elongated skulls, and then your brain whispers another name. The Star Child, found in Mexico, but eerily similar, an anomalously shaped skull with a brain cavity too large for its size, eye sockets too shallow for human tissue. Not Egyptian, but related? Some researchers claim there's a global pattern of these skulls, not widespread but clustered. Elongated, high-volume craniums, Paracas in Peru, some tribes in Africa, the Egyptian royals. Yes, some were artificially shaped, binding the heads of infants. But others? Bone scans show internal cranial structures that defy shaping. Born this way, not molded. Historians still argue whether this was a style choice, a tribal status symbol, or something more innate, passed down through bloodlines that knew something we forgot. You find a bench. Sit down. Breathe. That gold mask is watching you again from across the room. Tutankhamun, the boy king, the child of a heretic pharaoh and a vanishing queen. Buried in a hurry, his tomb unfinished, but sealed tightly, as if someone, human or not, didn't want anyone asking too many questions. Too late for that now. The museum closes in an hour. But your mind, wide open, racing, not just with facts, but with connections, shapes, shadows, that whisper from history that says, we came, we stayed a while, we'll be back. The museum fades behind you, swallowed by Cairo's noise and sunlight. But your thoughts are stuck back there, circling that golden mask and the bizarre features of Egypt's divine bloodline. You grab a coffee that doesn't quite help, and you head south. Next stop, Dendera. Hours later, you're standing inside a dim, echoing temple. The Temple of Hathor. Carvings and columns tower over you like frozen waterfalls of stone. The place smells like dust and incense. And yes, this is where we talk about the light bulbs. You tilt your head and squint. There it is, a wall relief deep inside one of the crypts. A long, oval shape like a glass jar or a bulb. Inside it, a snake-shaped filament, curling like a glowing thread. Beneath it, what looks like a power source, a cable, a support base, and priests or engineers holding the thing up like it's sacred tech. The fringe call it the Dendera light. Some claim it's proof the Egyptians had electricity. Others say it's symbolic, a lotus flower birthing a snake, representing life or fertility. That's the safe explanation. But you can't shake how modern it looks. It's weirdly specific, not abstract. It's eerily literal, like someone saw a plasma tube and said, yep, let's chisel that. Mainstream historians still argue whether the Dendera relief is just a misinterpretation by modern eyes hungry for mystery. And fair. We love seeing space shuttles in cave paintings and circuit boards in mosaics. But sometimes, there's a line between reaching and revealing. And this might be standing on that line. The temple itself is ancient, but the carvings are from the Greco-Roman period. Still, they claim to be copies of much older knowledge, restorations of earlier records. That's something the Egyptians were meticulous about, preserving information. Overwriting the past wasn't their style. Reinscribing it, however, constant. So you have to wonder, was this relief based on something real? Did an earlier civilization possess something like a light source, and these were crude, copied memories? Or is it simply ancient metaphor, snakes and flowers tangled into visual poetry? Here's a little nugget for your consideration. The ancient Egyptians worked in pitch-dark tombs with no soot residue found on ceilings. Which raises a basic question. How did they see? If they used oil lamps or torches, there should be black residue. But in many royal tombs, including those buried deep in the Valley of the Kings, the walls are soot-free. That's not impossible to explain. They could have used polished copper mirrors to reflect sunlight deep into chambers, but that system isn't easy to maintain. A lot of turning, a lot of coordination, a lot of room for error, and even that theory doesn't explain how some of the darkest, most remote corners of tombs have immaculate carvings and pigments. Somebody saw in the dark, or someone lit the dark. There's also the Baghdad battery, found across the Middle East, ceramic jars with copper and iron components. They could, with the right acidic fluid, produce a tiny electrical current. Fringe thinkers love connecting these to Dendera. See? Electricity. But the science is shaky. Maybe they were used for electroplating metals. Maybe they were just storage. Or maybe, just maybe, they were leftovers, primitive descendants of forgotten knowledge. You rest your hand on the stone wall. Cold. Still. But somehow buzzing. You imagine holding one of those Dendera bulbs. If that's even what it is, watching it glow in your hand like a sacred torch. Lighting the path for priests. Or for someone else entirely. A side room holds a curious carving. A strange-looking figure with an oversized head and almond-shaped eyes, sitting in a meditative pose. Some say it's a stylized image of a priest communing with the divine. Others argue it looks suspiciously like a gray alien. Round head, slender limbs, cross-legged in thought. And here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. In 1894, a French engineer named Auguste Mariette supposedly discovered a sealed sarcophagus in Dendera with no inscriptions, no artifacts, just the faint scent of burned metal. He reportedly took notes on its odd shape and magnetic residue. Then, nothing. The report disappeared. Chalk it up to French flair or conspiracy. Who knows? But it's one of those footnotes that refuses to be entirely forgotten. Historians still debate whether Egypt's technological depictions are being misread or misrepresented. Some argue that our own modern worldview keeps contaminating our interpretations. We see tubes, wires, spacecraft because those are the metaphors we know. The ancients might have been expressing spiritual truths through physical images. Like Plato's cave, but with more snakes and gold. But even if it's all metaphor, here's a puzzle. Why such specificity? Why would a civilization so obsessed with precision, mathematics, astronomy, and divine order choose symbolism so dangerously close to our own 21st century objects? Coincidence? Pattern recognition? Or something deeper? You leave the Temple of Hathor, the sun now blazing across the stone courtyard, and you look up toward the sky. The ancients always did. They watched, charted, prayed, and maybe remembered. Because sometimes, light doesn't just illuminate the path. Sometimes it points home. You're driving now. South again. The road unwinds through ancient dust and modern goats, little boys waving as you pass, selling dates from roadside carts. But your mind, it's hundreds of light years away, locked on a pinpoint of light in the night sky, Sirius. To the ancient Egyptians, Sirius wasn't just a star. It was the star, the watcher, the mother. It appeared in their sky like clockwork each year, just before the Nile flooded its banks, bringing life to the parched land. And to them, this wasn't just weather. It was prophecy. You arrive at a smaller village near the Libyan border. Remote, quiet, and very, very old. This is where the Dogon tribe come into the story. Now, let's be clear, the Dogon aren't Egyptian. They live in Mali, over 1,000 miles from the Nile. But their oral traditions, preserved with almost fanatical accuracy, speak of an origin that's anything but terrestrial. Here's what they say. Beings called the Namo came from the star Sirius. Specifically, from Sirius B, a white dwarf invisible to the naked eye and only discovered by Western astronomers in the 1860s. The Dogon somehow knew it was there. They described it as tiny, dense, and orbiting the larger star. And they've been telling that story for centuries. Historians still argue whether this knowledge was leaked from early European explorers or missionaries who visited the tribe in the 19th or early 20th century. Skeptics argue it's all a game of historical telephone, that the Dogon absorbed astronomy from outsiders, then folded it into their mythology. Maybe, but the problem is the depth of their knowledge. They also knew about Sirius C, a theoretical third star in the system, one we still haven't confirmed, but which some astronomers suspect exists. And they talked about it before anyone else. Coincidence? Lucky guess? Or something else entirely? You sit under a fig tree and look at the sky, imagining ancient priests or visitors looking back. The Dogon say the Namo were fish-like beings who descended in a spinning ship accompanied by fire and thunder. They brought language, math, agriculture, and sacred knowledge, then returned to the stars. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? The Egyptians had Isis, goddess of magic and healing, whose home was also Sirius. The annual heliacal rising of Sirius, when it reappeared in the dawn sky after being hidden by the sun, was cause for massive festivals. They called this the rebirth of Isis, and it aligned almost exactly with the Nile flood. Think about that. A star, a goddess, a flood, a rebirth. It's not mythology, it's a calendar, coded in metaphor. You might even call it a cosmic signal. Even the name Sirius comes from the Greek Sirios, meaning glowing or scorching. But the Egyptians called it Sopdet, and considered it not just a star, but a messenger. A beacon. Here's your quirky detour. In 1971, two authors, Robert Temple and Olivia Temple, published the Sirius Mystery, arguing that the Dogon had direct contact with an extraterrestrial intelligence. Mainstream academia dismissed it immediately. Too speculative, too convenient. But the book lingered, whispered. It never fully disappeared. And why would it? The Dogon weren't just throwing darts at the sky. They had stories, rituals, even sacred drawings that mapped the Sirius system with eerie precision. There's even a carved diagram resembling an elliptical orbit, something most non-scientists couldn't sketch accurately even now. And here's where the tie back to Egypt starts to get real weird. Some fringe researchers believe the Dogon are distant descendants of pre-dynastic Egyptians, survivors of a much older civilization that fled Egypt before dynasties rose, taking with them the memory of the stars. That they carried not just myths, but fragments of science disguised as religion. It's a nice idea. Romantic. A tribe of refugees safeguarding cosmic knowledge while the rest of the world forgot. But you sit with it a moment longer, because that same reverence for Sirius shows up in other ancient cultures too. In Sumeria, in India, even in early Mesoamerican mythologies. It's like everyone, everywhere, was watching the same celestial lighthouse, worshipping it, waiting for it. Some claim Sirius isn't just a star system. It's a hub, a galactic intersection point, maybe even a home base for whatever intelligence has been poking Earth like a curious child poking an anthill. It's close to us in cosmic terms, just 8.6 light-years away, a next-door neighbor. But maybe it wasn't always distant. Maybe once it was a destination, a round-trip route. And this is where you start noticing something odd about Egyptian religious iconography. The boats, the star maps, the repeating concept of return. Not just traveling upward to join the gods, but of gods descending, landing, teaching, judging, leaving behind a few rules, a few monuments, maybe a few warnings. You lie back on the warm stone, eyes scanning the sky. It's empty now, just birds. But at night, that's when it gets heavy. When Sirius blinks just above the horizon, flashing faint blue-white. Is it just a ball of gas and gravity? Or is it a reminder that someone was here before, and they're very, very punctual? Night has fallen now. You're in Luxor, but you're not among the crowds or souvenir stalls. You're far beneath the surface, navigating a narrow, claustrophobic shaft. Your flashlight cuts through the dust like a scalpel. The air smells metallic, old metal, not rust, something more sterile. Ancient, artificial. You're deep within a side tunnel of the Valley of the Kings. And tonight, we're going to talk about light, not the metaphorical kind, but the electric kind. Yes, again. Because the further you go into these tombs, the stranger the glow gets. There's a whisper among fringe theorists, a kind of underground mantra. The ancients had light. Not fire, light. And no place makes that idea feel more plausible, or more unsettling, than here. You arrive at the end of the shaft. Before you, painted in vivid reds and ochres, are scenes of the afterlife. But something stands out. On the wall is a depiction of a priest holding what looks suspiciously like a handheld device, cables trailing behind it, aimed at a figure kneeling in submission. Sure, it could be a ceremonial wand, or it could be a stylized electric tool. Ancient symbolism or ancient circuitry. Historians still argue whether these shapes are misread icons of religious authority or actual devices captured in pre-technological visual language. Either way, the resemblance is uncanny. These aren't vague swirls or mystical glyphs. They're geometric, wired, intentional. And this isn't just in one tomb. At Dendera, you saw the bulbs. But in tombs scattered from the Old Kingdom to the Ptolemaic era, recurring shapes appear: rods, cables, coils. Once is curiosity, twice is coincidence. 10 times? You start squinting harder. Let's talk physics for a moment. There's an old theory, mostly laughed out of conference rooms but still whispered late at night, that suggests the pyramids and other structures like them were energy collectors. Not batteries, not power plants, but resonance chambers. Devices that harnessed vibrational energy from the earth itself. Now this idea isn't born of nothing. The Great Pyramid sits atop geological fault lines that generate subtle electromagnetic pulses. Researchers have observed odd electromagnetic behavior at Giza. Nothing conclusive, but enough to make instruments flicker and compasses spin. Were the ancients aware of this? Did they build because of it? Here's your quirky tidbit for this section. A Russian team in 2018 published a fringe-adjacent study that modeled how the Great Pyramid might resonate with certain radio frequencies. Under specific conditions, the structure amplified electromagnetic waves inside its internal chambers. Was that accidental? Or was it by design? Let's go further into the dark. You find a worn engraving in one of the tombs, what looks like a pair of egg-shaped handles connected by lines to a round device above the figure's head. Some call it a depiction of Ra's divine rays. Others say it's a literal tool, a receiver, or even a plasma generator. There's also this, no soot. We mentioned this before, but let's look closer. The deeper you go, the less plausible torches become. The walls, clean. Not just clean, pristine. Tombs sealed for thousands of years still show zero smoke residue. There are theories, of course. Mirror arrays, open shafts. But some of these rooms have no practical ventilation and no structural path for reflected light. So, how were these incredible murals painted? Even mainstream scholars admit it's a mystery. Not scandalous, just unsolved. But it's one of those things that bugs you once you notice it, like the static charge in a room that should be silent. Some believe the ancient Egyptians had cold light, possibly piezoelectric in nature. That is, energy released through pressure on certain types of stone. Quartz, for example. And guess what kind of granite the pyramids and many tomb walls were lined with? You guessed it, quartz-rich granite. Could vibrations, either from human ritual, drums, chanting, or seismic movement, have generated light through the stone itself? Far-fetched? Maybe. But not impossible. Sound can move objects. Frequencies can affect matter. It's not magic. It's science we just don't fully understand, yet. And while we're on the topic of sound, there's a chamber in the Serapeum of Saqqara, an underground labyrinth filled with massive granite boxes, each weighing 70 tons or more. Perfectly cut, polished, slotted into position in tunnels, so narrow you have to squeeze sideways just to breathe. Nobody knows how they got them down there. Nobody knows what they were for. Some say they housed sacred bulls. Others say they were resonators, devices that vibrated at specific frequencies. Several fringe researchers report feeling strange physical sensations when inside the chamber. Pressure, heat, vibration, as if something were still humming. And here's something else. Several of these ancient rooms, especially those lined with quartz, react strangely to ultrasonic frequencies. Sound tests have shown that a consistent hum at a particular pitch causes measurable vibrations in the walls. That's not legend. That's repeatable. You're beginning to feel it yourself now. This sense that Egypt wasn't just building pretty tombs. It was building something else. Something functional. Ritual? Sure. Spiritual? Definitely. But maybe the rituals were a disguise, or maybe just a culturally encrypted way to describe machines, power sources, and tools too sacred, or too dangerous to name outright. So much of ancient knowledge has been flattened into metaphors. The gods fly in solar boats. Priests chant to the afterlife. Pharaohs ascend on beams of light. But what if these weren't poetic embellishments? What if they were just heavily redacted technical manuals? You step back outside. The stars are out now. The wind brushes the sand with that same ancient whisper. You look at your flashlight. It flickers. You tap it. Then look back at the temple wall. And you wonder, who had the first flashlight? And where, exactly, did they say they got it from? The road takes you east now, out of the tombs, out of the desert's gaping silence, and into something stranger. You're on a boat, a felucca to be precise, cutting through the Nile's black silk waters under a sky so full of stars it makes your throat tighten. The river reflects a million tiny lights, like it's trying to remember them. Because the Nile doesn't just flow through geography, it flows through cosmic alignment. Ancient Egypt wasn't built randomly. The cities, temples, pyramids, even the entire orientation of the Nile Valley was deeply, intentionally astronomical. And tonight, we talk about the Orion mystery. You dock near Abu Rawash, just north of Giza. There's not much left here, just broken stones and silence, but once it held a lesser-known pyramid. And when seen from above, something incredible becomes obvious. The three pyramids at Giza, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, aren't just lined up neatly. They mimic the belt stars of the Orion constellation. Even the size and offset of Menkaure mirrors Alnitak's slightly dimmer, skewed position in the sky. Historians still argue whether this alignment is coincidence, symbolism, or something deeper. To the ancient Egyptians, Orion wasn't just a bunch of stars. Orion was Osiris, god of death, rebirth, and the celestial cycle. When a pharaoh died, he wasn't just laid to rest. He was launched to join the stars, specifically to merge with Osiris. But here's where it gets wild. The pyramids at Giza are oriented to match Orion's belt not as it looks now, but as it appeared around 10,500 BCE. That's thousands of years before the accepted construction dates of the pyramids. Why would 2,500 BCE architects build their city to reflect a sky they'd never seen? Unless they had records, or they were restoring something older. That date, 10,500 BCE, keeps showing up. It's when Orion's belt aligned perfectly with the Giza pyramids. It's when the Sphinx, assuming it's a lion, would face Leo rising in the east during the spring equinox. It's when, according to some controversial geologists, the Sphinx shows water erosion inconsistent with desert weather and more aligned with thousands of years of rain. Rain. In Egypt, the Sahara wasn't always a desert. You lie back on the deck of the boat, listening to the creak of rope, the lapping of water, and the chorus of frogs in the reeds. Somewhere across the dark horizon, the Sphinx waits. It's always waiting, watching. The word Sphinx itself comes from Greek, but the original name is likely Horemheb, Horus of the horizon, a guardian, a marker. And now the theory takes a step further. What if the Sphinx is older than the pyramids? Much older? John Anthony West and geologist Robert Schoch proposed that the erosion on the Sphinx's body came not from wind, but from thousands of years of rainfall, pushing its origin back to, you guessed it, around 10,500 BCE. Mainstream Egyptologists screamed, no inscriptions, no records, but the geology speaks differently. And that's not speculation. That's water lines on limestone. Fringe theorists say the Sphinx and Giza were built to preserve a celestial map, a snapshot of the stars from that ancient date. A message in stone. We were here. Or maybe, we'll return when the sky looks like this again. Here's your quirky angle for tonight. There's a story from Arab historian al-Makrizi, written in the 15th century, claiming that before the Great Flood, a king named Sorid had a vision of a coming catastrophe. To preserve human knowledge, he built the pyramids and the Sphinx to store sacred science, math, and astronomy. He also said the builders came from the stars. You remember that flood myth? Not just Noah. Floods show up in Mesopotamia, India, China, Mesoamerica, everywhere. All at once. Almost like something happened globally, and someone tried to warn us. The Nile, the sky, and the architecture were never separate in ancient Egyptian minds. The Milky Way was seen as a heavenly river, a mirror of the Nile. Temples were built on east-west axes to honor the sun, and north-south to reflect the stars. Even burial chambers point upward, with shafts aligned to Orion or Sirius. Some believe that all of Egypt was one massive, living star map, a machine of memory, one that didn't just tell you where you were, but when. And that's the difference. They weren't worshipping the stars, they were syncing with them. Because if you're planning to make contact, if you're sending out a cosmic flare, you don't just build a tower. You build a clock, something the sky can find again. When the time is right, when Orion returns to the belt, when Leo greets the dawn, you close your eyes and imagine a ship, not sailing the Nile, but descending, matching star alignments, looking for the landmarks its creators left behind. Stone, silence, symmetry, and maybe someone like you, standing beneath it, staring up, whispering they came back. You wake before dawn. The Nile is still, the air heavy and sweet with lotus. In the distance, fishermen cast nets like ghosts. But today, you're heading away from water and into the sands again, this time to Saqqara. Not as famous as Giza, not as crowded, but older, stranger, and maybe more revealing. The step pyramid of Djoser, rising from the sand like a stone spine, is often considered Egypt's first large-scale construction in stone. Built over 4,700 years ago, it's credited to a man named Imhotep, high priest, physician, astronomer, architect. A man whose reputation grew so large that later Egyptians deified him. He was the Leonardo da Vinci of the ancient world, if da Vinci had claimed to talk to the stars. Imhotep designed the pyramid complex not just as a tomb, but as an initiation chamber. Beneath it lies a maze of tunnels and chambers, far more elaborate than the simple mastabas used before. Historians still argue whether it was meant for burial at all. Many now think the pyramid was ceremonial, or even astronomical. But here's where it gets good. Buried in those underground galleries are thousands of blue faience tiles, arranged in patterns along the walls and corridors. Not just decorative. Many believe they symbolize the night sky, a star map, a stellar tunnel, leading the soul not just to the afterlife, but to elsewhere. You enter the burial shaft carefully. The walls close in, the steps curve downward like a helix. You shine your flashlight on the blue tiles. They glitter faintly, cold, somehow humming with purpose. You can't explain it, but you feel like this place wasn't meant to hold a dead body. It was built to launch something, or someone. And remember, Djoser's complex wasn't just a pyramid. It included pavilions, shrines, symbolic gates, and one of the earliest known stone ceilings covered in stars. Literal stars, carved above the king's resting place. Not gods, not birds, stars. Why such obsession? Because to the Egyptians, death wasn't an end, it was departure. The soul wasn't buried, it was dispatched. And to do that, you needed coordinates. Tools, a map, a machine. And perhaps the most mysterious machine at Saqqara is something you don't even notice at first. The Serapeum. A short walk from the pyramid lies a vast underground gallery carved into solid bedrock. Inside, massive granite boxes, over 70 tons each. Perfectly polished, perfectly fitted. Their lids alone weigh more than a semi-truck. The mainstream view? They were sarcophagi for the Apis bulls, sacred animals believed to be avatars of Ptah or Osiris. Fine, except no bulls have ever been found inside. And here's the kicker. Even with today's equipment, it would be a logistical nightmare to transport those boxes through the narrow tunnels. You shine your light down the Serapeum's corridor. The silence presses against your ears. These aren't tombs. They don't feel like memorials. They feel like containment chambers, or vaults, or data storage units. Stone hard drives. Waiting. Some fringe researchers claim the granite used in these boxes, black diorite and rose granite, is unusually high in quartz, a mineral known for its piezoelectric properties. The same mineral used today in microchips and watches to stabilize frequencies. So were these boxes devices? Tuned to something? Or were they simply coffins for godly cows? Historians still debate the logistics, the precision, the purpose. Some even admit they don't know how the stone was shaped so perfectly with tools supposedly no more advanced than copper chisels and dolerite pounding stones. You touch one, smooth as glass, cold, almost humming beneath your palm. Then there's the Vault of Saqqara, another subterranean chamber dedicated to the falcon-headed god of the underworld. Within it lies a shaft so deep, so narrow, that few have ever climbed down it. At the bottom, nothing or everything. Stories say there's a chamber beyond it with no air, no carvings, no sound. A void. Fringe theorists call it the Black Room, a sterile space meant to be reset, or to reboot something. You step outside. The air hits hard, dry and full of sun. The desert stretches in all directions like a forgotten scroll. But overhead, the sky remains eternal blue and quietly watching. And above that sky, the belt of Orion, the dog star Sirius, the dark spaces in between. We always assume the ancients looked up and dreamed. But what if they were remembering? Here's your quirky detail. A now-lost papyrus known as the Scroll of the Heavens, allegedly once held in the Library of Alexandria, reportedly described the iron birds of the gods and the ladder of fire that touched the stars. Scholars argue it was myth, but no copy has ever been found. Just whispers. That's the thing about ancient Egypt. It's full of whispers. They echo through tombs, through granite, through blue tiles underground. They speak of departure, of return, of machines built of meaning, not just for gods, but by those who might have become gods, or at least been mistaken for them. You walk back along the causeway of Djoser's complex. The stones crunch beneath your feet. The sun bleeds down in golden sheets. And you realize, we keep thinking the past is buried. But in places like Saqqara, it's just dormant, waiting. The heat breaks as evening falls again. You're back in Giza now, sitting cross-legged at the base of the Great Pyramid, your hand resting against the limestone blocks. They're enormous, each one weighing up to 80 tons in some cases, and yet fitted together with such precision you can't slide a credit card between them. You lean your head back and let your eyes trace the structure's outline up into the hazy sky. This is where we go big, because the Great Pyramid of Khufu isn't just impressive. It's impossible, at least if you accept the official story, that it was built around 2560 BCE with copper tools, sleds, and tens of thousands of workers hauling blocks up ramps that would have to be miles long and steeper than a parking garage. And yet there it stands, still, immovable, unmatched, unexplained. And if you're wondering, yes, this is where the ancient alien theories start to glow hot. Let's look at the facts. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with incredible precision, to within 3/60ths of a degree. That's more accurate than most modern buildings, even with GPS. And that precision? Not just on one side. The entire base is a perfect square, only off by fractions of an inch over 13 acres. That's not a fluke. That's intelligence. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians could have achieved this using star alignments, shadow tracking, or simple observation. But here's the twist. Even if you grant them astronomical knowledge, you still have to explain how they moved the stones, carved them to laser-like tolerances, and did it all without cranes, wheels, or iron. And we haven't even talked about the location. The Great Pyramid sits on the exact center of Earth's land mass, not just Egypt, but the entire planet. That is, if you take all the continents and balance them like a globe, Giza is nearly dead center. Who calculated that? Google Earth? No. Someone 4,500 years ago, or longer. The pyramid also encodes the mathematical constant pi symbol, in its dimensions. Its base perimeter divided by its height equals 2 pi with uncanny accuracy. Mainstream Egyptologists call that a coincidence, an accidental artifact of slope and scale. But it's a big coincidence, especially when paired with the golden ratio, which also appears in the pyramid structure. And here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. Sir Isaac Newton once believed the pyramid held the key to unlocking divine geometry. He studied its dimensions obsessively, trying to reverse engineer God's blueprint. He even believed the ancient cubit used in its construction was a holy unit, lost to time, and encoded with cosmic proportions. But let's pull back and consider another theory. What if the pyramid wasn't just a tomb, or even a monument? What if it was a machine? Some researchers suggest the pyramid acted as a power generator, not like a nuclear reactor, but through vibrational resonance. The internal chambers, especially the so-called King's Chamber, are built with granite so rich in quartz it almost hums when struck. Like a tuning fork, like an amplifier. Water may have flowed beneath the pyramid from the nearby Nile, creating vibration. Those vibrations could have resonated upward through the granite, the frequencies amplified by the carefully engineered chambers. And what happens when quartz is stressed? Electricity, piezoelectric charge. Was this ancient tech? Not wires and screens, but sound, geometry, frequency. The evidence is circumstantial. The Grand Gallery has strange notches, like it once housed sliding components or massive resonance panels. The so-called air shafts aren't for breathing, they aim directly at the belt of Orion and Sirius. Not by mistake, by design. Historians still debate whether the internal structure was symbolic or functional. A journey for the soul, a model of the cosmos, or something far more literal, a device for sending or receiving energy, even messages? And then there's the missing capstone. The Great Pyramid never had a true tip in the modern era. But what if it once did? A golden pyramid ion? Or something more exotic? A crystalline conductor? A transmitter? The pyramid might have once glowed, not visibly but electrically. Broadcasting what? A beacon. Or a warning. You lie down on the cool stone, your back against 5,000 years of mystery. You stare at the stars above, and for a moment, you swear they don't look random. They're mapped. Intentional. Like the whole sky is a code and Giza is the key. And then you remember, there are no hieroglyphs inside the Great Pyramid. None. Not one inscription. Not one god name. No dedications, no curses, no prayers. Just stone. As if whoever built it was an Egyptian, or didn't need to explain themselves. It's not a book. It's not a story. It's a statement. We were here. We understood. And we built this to last longer than your empires, your languages, even your memory. So go ahead, measure it. Decode it. Debate it. But one day, you'll know what it was for. The wind shifts as you rise from the pyramid's base. Something stirs in the air, not just sand, but silence. Thick. Heavy. You wander away from the tourist paths, where flashlights don't shine, and tour guides stop walking. Toward the edge of the plateau, where the desert presses against ancient stone like time trying to bury its own evidence. Tonight, we talk about the ones who came before the pharaohs. Egypt's dynastic history, the 31 dynasties, the kings with names like Ramses and Seti and Cleopatra, is just a sliver of its full age. Before those names, before writing, even before what archaeologists label pre-dynastic, there's a long, gray silence in the record. And it's in that gap where the whispers of gods walking the earth live. Ancient Egyptian kings often described themselves as descendants of divine beings. Not metaphorical gods, but literal rulers called the Shemsahor, the followers of Horus. These beings, according to ancient king lists, ruled Egypt in a time before time, in what's sometimes called the Zep Tepi, or first time. Historians still argue whether Zep Tepi is myth or mangled memory. But the texts are surprisingly structured. The Turin King List and the Palermo Stone, two of Egypt's oldest king records, mention not just human rulers, but reigns that lasted thousands of years. Some entries record kings who ruled for 1,200 years. 500, even over 10,000 years. That's not poetic. That's math. Mainstream scholars usually hand-wave this as numerological flair or symbolic calendar systems. But the ancient Egyptians were obsessed with record-keeping. They didn't play fast and loose with their timelines. They weren't chaotic poets. They were accountants of eternity. You crouched near a sandstone outcrop where early symbols were carved long before hieroglyphs. These aren't birds and eyes and ankhs. They're glyphs without names. Circles within circles. Stars inside chevrons. Strangely geometric. Some look like data diagrams. Others resemble ships. Not boats. Not reed skiffs on the Nile. But vessels. There's a rock formation near the Fayum called the Nabta Playa, and it's older than the pyramids by millennia. Here, buried in the desert, is an ancient stone circle, often called Africa's Stonehenge. It aligns with the summer solstice, and yes, the rising of Sirius. The stones are small, but the intention is big, a calendar set into the earth itself. But why build a star clock in a wasteland? Because back then, the Sahara wasn't a desert. It was green, wet, alive. And whoever lived there watched the skies. Not for poetry, for precision. And then there's Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. Not Egyptian, no. But its temples are over 11,000 years old, predating writing, agriculture, and everything we associate with civilization. And yet, perfect alignment, stellar knowledge, carvings of strange animals, and figures wearing helmets. Göbekli Tepe and Zep Tepi exist oceans apart in time and space, but the implications are the same. Someone knew too much too early. Your quirky nugget for this section. In 1933, French mystic Schwaller de Lubeck spent years studying Egyptian temples. He didn't just read their symbols, he measured them. And he proposed a wild theory, that the temples weren't just places of worship, but mathematical instruments, encoding sacred harmonics and planetary motion. Most archaeologists laughed, until someone checked his measurements. They were dead on. Back to Giza now. You walk past a sealed shaft on the plateau's edge. Locals whisper about it, say it leads to the Hall of Records, a legendary chamber buried beneath the Sphinx's paw, said to contain the lost knowledge of the Shem-Sahor. The story goes, a vault, untouched by flood or war, holding scrolls, star maps, tools, even devices left behind by the gods. The American psychic Edgar Cayce once predicted this chamber would be discovered in the late 20th century. Lo and behold, in the 1990s, seismic tests conducted by John Anthony West and Dr. Thomas DeBecke revealed a rectangular anomaly beneath the Sphinx. A hollow space, perfectly measured, covered up quickly, still officially unexplored. Historians still debate whether this so-called hall exists at all. The Egyptian government has denied all claims, and no formal excavation has taken place. But the whispers persist. Quiet, patient, like the desert itself. You press your hand to the stone. The Sphinx stares forward, eternally mute, as if guarding something. It has seen empires rise and fall. Watched languages die. Watched machines rise and fail. But it never speaks. It just waits. And now you understand the Zep Tepi wasn't a fairy tale. It was a memory. Not of gods made up in stories, but of beings who walked, built, and taught. Maybe not from here. Maybe not human. But present. The Shem-Sahor were not kings. They were keepers. Of time. Of knowledge. Of the signal. You glance up at the stars again. Still in their positions. Still waiting. Like bookmarks in the black. The Shem-Sahor may have left. But their calendar didn't. You leave Giza behind again, but not for a museum or another ruin. This time, you head to a storage warehouse just outside Cairo. No tourists, no plaques. Just dust, crates, and forgotten things. Because sometimes the best parts of history don't sit in glass cases. They're shoved in the back with a do not catalog label. Tonight, we sift through the artifacts that don't fit. They're called U-parts, short for out-of-place artifacts. Objects discovered in ancient contexts that seem far too advanced, or just plain bizarre, for their supposed era. And Egypt? Egypt has more than its fair share. Take the Obelisk carving, for instance. You probably already know it. It went viral before viral was a thing. On a ceiling beam in the temple of Seti I at Abydos, there's a series of hieroglyphs that appear to show a helicopter, a modern-looking plane, even something that resembles a hovercraft or spaceship. Historians still argue whether it's an illusion, an overlapping inscription created by later plastering, or whether it really is a case of an ancient artist carving what he saw, or remembered. The official stance is palimpsest, 2 sets of hieroglyphs carved at different times, leading to weird overlaps. Fair enough, but the resemblance is a little too precise. You can argue away one shape, maybe 2, but a whole fleet. You lean in close, studying the beam. It's not pixel perfect, sure, but there's a rotor blade, a fuselage, stabilizers. It's not vague, it's familiar, and that's what unsettles you. Then there's the Saqqara bird. Discovered in 1898 in a tomb near Saqqara, this small wooden figurine is officially labeled as a bird. But it doesn't look like any known species. It has straight wings, a vertical tail, and no feet. And most importantly, no attempt to carve feathers. It looks less like a living animal and more like a model glider. In 2006, a group of aeronautical engineers built a replica of the Saqqara bird. With a few modern tweaks for symmetry, it flew quite well. Balanced lift, stable glide path, all from a shape supposedly carved 2,200 years ago. Quirky side note, the ancient Egyptian word inscribed on the original model was "it flies." That's not poetry, that's engineering. Now let's talk metal. Ancient Egypt had access to gold and copper, but not iron. Or so we thought. In 2016, a dagger was pulled from the tomb of Tutankhamun, a sleek, polished blade found resting at his side. And unlike other grave goods, this dagger was made not of bronze, but iron. But not just any iron. Meteoric iron. Tests revealed the dagger's composition contained high levels of nickel and cobalt, consistent with iron from a meteorite, not Earth. It would have required extremely high temperatures to forge, temperatures well beyond what Egypt was thought capable of at the time. So where did that technology come from? And who decided the boy king should be buried with a blade from the stars? Historians still argue whether this was symbolic, royalty returning to the heavens, armed with cosmic metal, or whether it's a trace of an earlier, more advanced society, one that had the know-how to refine celestial materials and shape them with precision. Now here's one you don't hear often. In 1936, a small object was excavated from a tomb near the Temple of Horus in Edfu. It was a copper alloy gear, a spiral cog with defined teeth, too damaged to test functionally, and now stored in a dusty museum drawer with no plaque. Just an inventory number. Egyptologists waved it away. Maybe it was part of a ceremonial tool. Maybe the teeth were decorative. But to mechanical engineers, it looks like something meant to turn, to interface. You sit with these objects spread before you in the dim, flickering light of a warehouse bulb. Helicopters, gliders, meteor blades, gears. It's like a puzzle with half the pieces missing, and someone from long ago tried to hide the lid of the box. There's a pattern here. Not in the artifacts themselves, but in how they're treated. Dismissed. Filed away. Not because they're definitely fake, but because they're inconvenient. And here's the part that sticks with you. If these are just mistakes, anomalies, bad luck carvings, and misidentified birds, why are they all pointing in the same direction? Why do so many errors resemble technology? Why do so many coincidences align with stars? Why do so many myths echo with precision? It's like brushing dust off a painting only to realize it's a blueprint. A record. Something meant to be seen. Not just admired, but understood. Maybe even rebuilt. You recall something strange from earlier texts. The Benben stone. The object that once rested atop the pyramids. Described as radiant. Pointed. Capable of channeling divine power. Some say it was meteoric iron like Tut's dagger. Others say it glowed. A transmitter? A battery? Or just a story? The Benben stone was linked to Ra, the sun god, but also to a rival. The myth goes, it fell from the sky and created the first land, meaning creation began not with gods or words, but with something falling. Something arriving. You close the storage crate gently. The latch clicks. The warehouse around you hums low, quiet. You know there are more artifacts like these, scattered in collections, mislabeled in drawers, lost in catalog systems. And they're not just whispers of old gods. They're breadcrumbs. Someone left a trail. Maybe not for us to follow now. Maybe for someone else, when we're ready. You're standing on a windswept plateau just outside of Aswan now, where the granite is redder, denser, harder. This is the place the ancients came to cut stone. And not just any stone, Aswan granite, so tough it still dulls modern blades. And yet somehow, thousands of years ago, they sliced it, shaped it, polished it. Tonight, we're not visiting a temple or a tomb. We're standing in front of a failure. A mystery that was never completed. And maybe never meant to be. The unfinished obelisk lies on its side in a granite quarry, massive, cracked, and abandoned. If completed, it would have been the largest obelisk ever constructed, weighing over 1,100 tons. That's more than the Statue of Liberty. Carved directly out of bedrock, it's as if the builders had decided to take a bite out of the earth itself. But here's the problem, nobody knows how. Historians still argue whether ancient tools, copper chisels and dolerite pounding stones, could have done the job. And yes, there's evidence of pounding. The marks are real, but they're inconsistent. Some are ragged, like manual labor. Others? Smooth, curved cuts. Almost as if something else, a tool we haven't identified, was used. You crouch next to the base, where the obelisk still clings to the quarry floor. And you see something strange. Grooves, not cracks, deep and deliberate, slicing through the stone with arc-like precision. This isn't the randomness of pounding. It's directional, linear, mechanical. Some researchers propose sonic drilling, or the use of unknown abrasives. One fringe theory suggests directed energy, like ultrasound or high-frequency vibration, which could break down stone molecularly, especially quartz-heavy granite like this. You touch the wall. It's still warm from the sun, but cold at its core. And in that contrast, you feel the tension, not between heat and cold, but between what we know and what we see. And what we see doesn't add up. Nearby, there are tool marks in the quarry walls that look like modern circular saw blades. Not literally, but the same motion. Parallel cuts, clean shears, consistent spacing. If these were made with pounding stones, someone had superhuman accuracy and iron patience. Your quirky tidbit for tonight. In 1995, researchers found core drilling holes in blocks near the Great Pyramid that showed spiral grooves, perfectly even. This type of spiral can only be made by rotary drilling, the kind used in modern stonework. The grooves are 0.100 inch apart, exactly the width of some modern diamond-tipped drills. Yet we're told these were made with copper tubes and sand. Sure, let's not forget, Egypt wasn't just a land of limestone. It worked in basalt, diorite, granite, all harder than steel. Some statues, like the Colossi of Memnon or the statue of Ramses II, are carved from single blocks of granite weighing hundreds of tons. Not assembled, not pieced, carved. How do you move a block that size, let alone raise it? Historians still argue whether sleds, lubricated sand, and manpower were enough. And maybe they were. But at some point, you look at the logistics, the number of workers, the angles, the time, and it becomes more theory than explanation. Now think back to the pyramids. Think of those perfect blocks. The way they interlock. The zero margin for error. That's not art. That's calculation. And here's the thing. No blueprints have ever been found. No schematics. No rough drafts. Just finished product. As if the knowledge to build this way existed in the heads of a few. Or came from somewhere else. You walk among other half-finished stones. Obelisks cracked mid-carving. Blocks left in place. Like a factory abandoned overnight. Like something interrupted the process. A war? A flood? Or something more cosmic? Because the obelisks weren't just monuments. They were conductors, tapered to the sky, capped with gold or electrum to catch the sun, or something else. Maybe light, maybe energy. Egyptians said obelisks anchored the heavens. Literally sky nails. That they stabilized the world's connection to the divine. But what if that wasn't metaphor? What if they were receivers? Modern antennas are shaped not unlike obelisks. Tall, narrow, directed upward. Maybe the ancients weren't copying natural shapes. Maybe they were building machines in disguise. It brings us back to a question we keep asking, quietly, nervously. Did the Egyptians build all of this on their own? Or were they taught? Shown? And if so, by whom? You look around the quarry one last time. The unfinished obelisk lies before you, still fused to the earth. Still unresolved. Still asking, not just how, but also why stop? And what were we about to discover before the chisel broke? Because sometimes the greatest truths aren't in what was completed. They're in what was abandoned. Like a machine paused mid-assembly. Or a message half-sent. Waiting for someone, maybe you, to finish it. You leave the quarry behind as twilight turns the desert lavender. Dust clings to your boots, and your thoughts feel heavier than granite. But the night isn't done with you yet. You head south now, deeper into the temple lands, where carvings grow denser and the air hums with meaning. Welcome to Dendera, home of the Temple of Hathor. To most visitors, it's just another temple. Beautiful, sure. Columns like forest trunks, blue ceilings scattered with golden stars, and walls filled with familiar gods. Hathor with her cow horns, Horus with his falcon stare. But you're not here for that. You're here for what lies underground. Because Dendera hides a chamber. And inside that chamber lies a carving. It's known in fringe circles as the Dendera light. On the wall, you see what seems, at first glance, to be a large lotus flower with a snake curling from its center. Harmless enough. But then your brain starts drawing lines. The lotus shape looks like a bulb. The snake, a filament. The whole image is cradled by what resembles a support structure, almost like a modern-day electrical plug. And beneath it, a figure holds two daggers, not in aggression but in stabilization. Historians still argue whether it's a symbolic depiction of rebirth or a misunderstood ritual scene. But engineers and physicists, they look at it and go, that's a vacuum tube. Some go even further and say it resembles a Crookes tube, a precursor to the modern light bulb. You step back. There's more than one of these carvings. In another scene, a figure appears to be adjusting the device. Another, two such bulbs appear side by side as if connected. Now pair that with another anomaly, no soot. Despite thousands of years of use, the ceilings of Dendera, like most underground chambers in Egypt, show no smoke residue. No torch burns, no lamp black, and yet the carvings are flawless. As if they had a different kind of illumination. Clean, bright, controlled. Theories swirl. Some suggest chemical lighting, like burning naphtha or gas. Others propose mirrors, elaborate systems of bronze plates bouncing sunlight into deep spaces. But mirrors scatter light. They lose intensity. They don't etch shadows this sharp. So how did the ancients carve precise hieroglyphs in pitch darkness? Fringe theorists say, electricity. That they use simple batteries like the so-called Baghdad battery found in Iraq, ceramic jars with copper cylinders and iron rods, potentially capable of generating low voltage when filled with vinegar. Proof is shaky, but it's plausible. Now here's your quirky nugget. One of the columns in Dendera has a carving that resembles an antenna. Not metaphorical, literal. A straight vertical rod with horizontal lines, capped with what looks like a rounded node. Beside it, hieroglyphs read, "The pillar that brings light." No big deal. Unless it's exactly what it says. You walk past scenes of pharaohs offering angst to Hathor, of Horus embracing Ra. And then your eyes land on something stranger, the zodiac ceiling. It's round. It's detailed. It's impossibly accurate. The Dendera zodiac shows all 12 signs, Aries, Taurus, Leo, mapped out in a circular pattern, like a star chart. Astronomers now agree. It maps the exact positions of stars and planets at a specific moment in time. That moment? Somewhere around 700 BCE. Others argue older, and older still. Historians still debate whether the zodiac was based on actual astronomical observation, or simply copied from Mesopotamian sources. But the precision suggests direct, sustained tracking of the night sky across generations. And that brings us to the strangest idea of all. What if the temples weren't just for worship? What if they were data centers? Not digital, of course, but analog repositories. Places where knowledge was encoded into architecture, frequencies into columns, celestial charts into ceilings, electrical diagrams into myth. The ancients may not have said volts or amperes, but they said Ka, life force flow. They didn't have frequencies, but they had hey cow, words of power, vibration. You run your hand along the wall, and you begin to see it. Not gods and animals, but functions, inputs, outputs, energy cycles. They didn't forget what they knew. They hid it, because maybe it wasn't for everyone. Maybe it wasn't even for humans. And here's the question no one dares ask. What if the Dendera light wasn't meant for us to understand? What if it was built to activate only when certain conditions returned? When the stars aligned again? When the sky matched the map? When they came back? You look around the chamber. The air is still. The temperature somehow steady. Not hot. Not cold. Controlled. And you feel it again, that presence. That silence that isn't empty but listening. Like the room has a memory. Like it's waiting for something to turn back on. You exhale, step back, and whisper, half joking, half serious, "Alexa, turn on Dendera." You step into the last temple of the night, a little farther south, where tourists barely trickle, and even the camels look confused to be here. This is Philae, the temple of Isis. And fittingly, it's the final piece of this puzzle. Because if Dendera hinted at technology, Philae whispers about memory and origin. Isis isn't just any goddess. She's the one who reassembled Osiris after his murder, who birthed Horus, who protected Egypt with knowledge and magic. But she wasn't just worshipped as a divine mother. She was known as she who knows the names. Names of gods, of people, and of things not from this world. Inside the temple, carvings show her holding an ankh, the symbol of life, but it looks more like a key. A tuning fork, a device. And then there's Osiris's resurrection, told in myth, but always with hints of something more mechanical. His dismembered body was reassembled, and he was restored to life not with prayer, but with vibration, with the utterance of secret sounds, with energy. Historians still argue whether these myths were symbolic or literal. But when the same core idea repeats, restoration through resonance, you have to start listening. And Isis? Her temple wasn't just a shrine. It was a codebook. Walls lined with spells, coordinates, and frequencies. You move deeper into the inner sanctum, where a strange carving catches your eye. Isis holding a child. Behind her, a star. Not just any star, Sirius. Known in Egypt as Sopdet, Sirius was the marker of the Nile's flooding. But also, the calendar reset. The beginning of time. Every year, the heliacal rising of Sirius signaled Zep Tepi, the first time. You remember that from earlier. That mysterious, pre-dynastic era where gods ruled and pyramids may have served as celestial machines. But here's the weirdest part. Ancient texts state, flat out, that Sirius wasn't always alone. That it once had a companion star. A dark twin, invisible to the eye. Doesn't that sound like a myth? Except it's real. In modern astronomy, Sirius A has a white dwarf companion called Sirius B, tiny, dense, and undetectable without a telescope. The Dogon tribe of Mali, who claim ancestral contact with sky teachers, knew of this star centuries before it was discovered in the West. They even described its orbital pattern. Coincidence? Or legacy? Your quirky detail for tonight. On a pillar in the Philae Temple, there's a depiction of what looks like a satellite dish, a broad bowl with a central point, and what appears to be waves radiating outward. Most say it's symbolic. A flower, a sunburst. But the symmetry is striking. And it's not alone. You've now seen spiral carvings, antenna-like columns, star charts, obelisks shaped like transmitters, and bulbs that look like they belong in a 1930s laboratory. It's not one artifact. It's a pattern. So what does it all point to? Maybe the gods weren't gods. Maybe they were visitors. From Sirius? From Orion? From wherever up really is. Maybe they came here not to rule, but to guide. To shape. To build the seed of something we still barely understand. Maybe they left machines behind, coded in myth, disguised as temples, encoded in stone. And maybe we've forgotten how to read them. The Egyptians didn't fear death. They feared being disconnected from the stars, from the cycle, from the source. Everything they built was a tether. An attempt to stay aligned with that knowledge, that signal. And now, we look up at the sky and call it random. They looked up and saw a return address. You stand in the final chamber now. The air is thick with incense dust and old stone. You close your eyes and hear nothing, but feel something, the hum of deep time, of memory. It doesn't shout, it waits, because here's the secret no tour guide will tell you. The story of ancient Egypt isn't just about the past. It's about a message left for the future, and maybe that future is now. You step out of the temple slowly, the stone still warm beneath your fingertips, the stars sharp and clear overhead. The Nile flows gently in the distance, timeless and quiet. Somewhere, a bird calls once and goes still. You exhale. Let the dust settle off your shoulders. Let the questions drift like sand through open fingers. You've traveled deep tonight, not just across Egypt's deserts and temples, but across time itself. Across stories that might be more than stories. Maybe what you've seen was myth. Maybe it was metaphor. Or maybe, just maybe, it was memory. Woven into stone and sky. Left behind by hands that knew things we've only just begun to remember. Let it all fade now. The blue tiles of Saqqara, the star shafts of the Great Pyramid, the glowing lotus of Dendera. They're still there. Quiet. Waiting for someone to see them again. Maybe you already have. The questions don't need answers tonight. The mysteries are doing their job, gently pulling the corners of your mind toward wonder. Toward possibility. That's enough. The stars will slowly above you now, quiet and endless. You're safe. You're small. You're part of the pattern. So let your breath slow. Let your body sink. Let the silence wrap you like linen, soft and ancient. Let the questions hum far in the distance, like a forgotten frequency just beneath dreaming. And sleep.